Howdy folks, I am your host, the Mighty Bjorn, and I got a bit of a gear video for you today. Guns gear type video. Going to be talking about drums, particularly why the military doesn't use them. And this is from the standpoint of I was actually in the service and actually have first-hand knowledge of this. Um, Mostly because of like talking to the armorer in my unit and stuff like that. We discussed, various things of this nature over my years when I was in the service. And I do see this question asked quite often, and I'm not sure kind of why it's still asked, but whatever. I'll take my shot of answering this question and hopefully give people a better understanding of why the military doesn't use drums and is so married to the idea of using particularly 30 round magazines. Um, and basically, I just want to start off with, in the first place, is drums tend to be bulky. Not all of them are, although they all tend to be a little bit bulkier than a magazine. A magazine is nice and in line with the firearm, where a drum tends to kind of protrude a bit from the firearm. Now this one's kind of an extreme example of the drum protruding from the firearm. And let's be honest, if you have a drum like this in your M16 or your M4, do you really want to try to do CQB with a drum magazine that big and that bulky coming from your firearm? Or, you know, imagine trying to fit yourself in like an M113 armor personnel carrier where it's already tight conditions and there's barely enough room for you, plus the 10 other people that you're with, plus all of your equipment. So, tight conditions is a quite common occurrence, especially in the military, as well as I would argue with SWAT teams and police departments, because most cop cars nowadays does have service rifles. Another issue too is kind of weight. When you start talking about putting optics on rifles, grenade launchers, suppressors, flashlights, basically all your Gucci man toys, you start taking a 6.5 pound rifle and you turn it pretty quickly into a 9 pound rifle. And then you want to put a magazine on that rifle that adds another 3 pounds to that rifle. Um, I mean, there is the benefit of, yeah, that's a lot of rounds that you can shoot before needing to reload, especially like in the case of like a 100 round drum. But lugging around 12 pounds in your hands all day, yeah, that doesn't sound like a lot of fun. And realistically, it's not. Even lugging around like an M4 carbine with an loaded M203 grenade launcher, lugging that around all day is not fun. You do get quite a bit tired lugging around all the equipment you have to lug around all day in the field. So adding the weight of a drum does not make that situation any better. The next thing I want to discuss is reliability. Realistically, when it comes to reliability, drums have always been way behind magazines when it comes to reliability. And even over the years, magazines has had reliability issues. Understand that like the early 30 round Stanag magazines were not the most reliable magazines out there, which is one reason why during Vietnam the military used a lot of 20 round Stanag magazines instead of the 30 round magazines, because the early 30 round mags were not reliable. And that being said, even to this day, some of the cheap aftermarket magazines are not reliable. Now, with that being said, you can still make a really reliable Stanag magazine or even a really reliable AK magazine for a pretty cheap price. Now, when it comes to drums, that's a whole different matter. There is no such thing as making a cheap, reliable drum. Um, and that being said, too, drums have a lot of little springs and internal bits to them. And those little springs and internal bits, yeah, they don't like dirt. And when you're talking in context of the military in particular, not probably so much law enforcement, but even law enforcement should be thrown in this ball. Yeah, dirt everywhere. You are going to be in dirty, muddy environments. or desert environments or whatever types of environments that will even mess with magazines, more so over with drums. Now, with that being said, reloading a drum, I know video games does not show this very well for you Call of Duty players, but reloading a drum magazine is actually a real pain in the butt. I've actually tried to reload. They were 50 round drums for an AKM, and it is a really awkward process compared to reloading a 30 round, banana magazine. I would rather reload just a 30 round magazine than having to deal with a drum, to be honest, just because it's so much quicker. Yes, I have to reload more often, but when I do reload, or would have to reload, the gun gets back into action much quicker. So that has to be stated as well. Now, when it comes to carrying, there's really not a lot of different types of magazine pouches and things like that out there on the market for different types of drum magazines. And a lot of plate carriers and recon type rigs and carry vests and stuff of that nature are more geared towards using basically magazine carriers over drum magazine carriers, because there's just not a lot of different types of drum magazine carriers out there on the market. They are out there, there's just not a lot of them. Now, with that being said, at the end of the day, it really, realistically, a lot of it comes down to cost. Drums are way more expensive than magazines. You got to understand that for you as an individual person, you're going out and buying a single drum magazine, where the military, when they're buying magazines, they're buying hundreds of thousands of magazines. Where you're buying magazines, you might be buying a dozen, and maybe you might go out and buy a drum, or you buy two drums. Where the military would literally have to buy hundreds of thousands of drums, and that would really rack up to being extremely expensive, extremely quick, especially when you consider that the typical mil-spec aluminum Stanag, the military is probably picking those things up for like $1.50 a piece. Consider how cheap they are on the civilian market. You can get these things for under $10, folks. Like, you can go to Palmetto State Armory and pick these things up for like $8 a pop, brand new. So the military is definitely getting these things even cheaper still. They're probably, like I said, $1.50, $1.25, maybe even less. Who knows? Because, like I said, they're buying hundreds and thousands of these things. So realistically, the military is married to using Stanag magazines. You see a lot of police departments using Stanag magazines. I mean, realistically, that's why. It's just the Stanag magazine, or, well, just magazines in general. I don't want to, I'm kind of keep saying Stanags. I don't want to avoid AKs in this discussion, because AKs should be in this discussion as well, as there is drums for AKs. Realistically, it's just magazines as a service item is just better than a drum, just because of all the reasons I have literally just presented here. But anyway, folks, I'm going to keep it kind of short today. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video and maybe learned something new. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Really quick too, I do want to take a moment to say thank you to everyone who views the videos, likes, comments, and subscribes. That does help me out, cuck the YouTube algorithm, because I've really had enough of the YouTube algorithm and constantly fighting with that thing. As well as I do want to take a moment to say thank you to the Patreon supporters. They help me and help the channel with a budget, and they help make content like this happen. They help me with things such as ammunition, equipment, and etc. But anyway, folks, I'm going to leave it off at that. Once again, hopefully you all enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for tuning in, and have yourself a wonderful day.